And this is whenever you're ready.
This is Sara Mercado, and today is Saturday, October 15th, 2016, and I'm here at the Illinois State Museum in Springfield, Illinois. I am here with Dr. Michael Wiant, who is the interim director of the Illinois State Museum and the director of the Dickson Mounds site as well.
That's correct.
Thank you, Mike, for sitting down with us today. And to begin with, please tell us a little bit about your background and your career.
Well, I went to college to be a teacher, and in the midst of going through that curriculum, I took an archaeology class. The subject matter attracted my attention. After I graduated, completed my student teaching, I had the opportunity to do some field work for about 3 years. And at the end of that, I decided that graduate training in anthropology was the way I wanted to proceed. So I completed a master's degree at Illinois State University, moved on to Northwestern University, and achieved a master's degree and a PhD in anthropology. And soon thereafter was employed at the Illinois State Museum. First in the anthropology section as a curator, then chair of the section, and then in 2003, I had the opportunity to become the director of the Dickson Mounds Museum.
And in this career, you've done some notable archaeological work. Can you tell us a little bit about some of those finds that you've found?
Archaeology is an extraordinary undertaking. You're never quite sure what you're going to discover. I had the opportunity to excavate at a series of small sites to learn the trade. But in 1975, I was given the opportunity to be a supervisor, an archaeological supervisor at the excavation of a site called Koster. Koster was this decade-long undertaking, very large scale, with an enormous public presence, a large, deeply stratified archaeological site that ranged in age from about 8,500 years ago to about 1,000 years ago. The following year, I became the director of the excavations, and we spent most of our time excavating in a village that was occupied about 8,500 years ago. And it turned out to be enormously insightful. Not only were the day-to-day activities of people living at that time and place recorded, but we made other discoveries, the most notable of which is probably the remains of 4 dogs. These are demonstrated to be domesticated dogs, so they're some of the oldest domesticated dogs in North America and gave rise to a great bit of research. The other excavation that was notable for me was called Napoleon Hollow. This was a large village site. Again, it stretched over a great period of time, but one of the points in time that we were particularly interested in was a village about 2,000 years old. Our interest in that was because the village was at the base of the bluff in the Illinois River floodplain, and at the crest of the bluff was a cemetery of the same age. So we were working together not only to look at and see what life was like, but we also had a perspective about how the residents of that community were treated when they passed.
Okay. From the research I've done, there was the Elizabeth Mounds site as well.
Yes.
And here at the Illinois State Museum, you have the vessels found at that site that you helped discover. Can you tell us a little bit about the discovery of that and the impact on the prehistoric understanding of Illinois that helped to influence?
So Napoleon Hollow was the village site I related to you just a moment ago, and the Elizabeth site is the 2,000-year-old cemetery on the crest of the bluff. When we had completed our excavations at Napoleon Hollow, one of the things that was very interesting to us is it did not appear to be an everyday living site. We found the remains of a very large building, a circular building, and the kinds of objects that we discovered in that building were much more related to ritual and ceremony than everyday life. So it posed the question, is it possible that in fact this part of the community was deeply involved in the treatment of the dead? As the excavations continued at the Elizabeth site, indeed, it was a formal cemetery. People were laid to rest in tombs that were encompassed by large mounds of earth. And my most notable experience in that excavation was after we had finished working in the Napoleon Hollow community, my colleagues excavating in the cemetery asked me to come and take a look at part of an excavation that they were concluding at the end of the field season. They were in a very large tomb area within the body of the mound, and on the floor of the tomb was a small dark stain, which we interpreted probably to be a grave. As work continued, one of the excavators revealed the very upper lip of a ceramic vessel, and they asked me to take a closer look and to excavate those materials. It turned out to be an extraordinary discovery, a rare opportunity. About 24 earthenware pots, many highly decorated, were found in clusters nested in one another. In other words, there was a large bowl with a smaller one in it and another one of smaller size in it. And we excavated into the dark to recover these materials and bring them back to the laboratory for closer inspection. Those containers are now on exhibit at the Illinois State Museum, and they feature what life was like about 2,000 years ago in Illinois.
Great. Must have been a great discovery to find those. And speaking of the Illinois State Museum, how has the closure and reopening of the Illinois State Museum impacted public history here in Illinois?
This question's a very good question, and you've given me a lot to think about. In the end, I decided that what it's really demonstrated to us is that public history is fragile. We tend to take for granted the place of history and public history in society, in that it will always be there, and we need not worry about it because it will be sustained and available to succeeding generations. I think the experience of the Illinois State Museum is a wake-up call for all of us, that we need to be much more aware of the fact that to sustain public history, we need to be thinking every day about how we invest in it, how we maintain it, how we sustain it to go on to future generations. So the experience of closing a museum that's been open for 138 years, and then after a period of time of reopening it, has been a very sobering experience to realize that the notion of permanence may not be as solid as we once thought, and that we need to redouble our efforts to think about how we maintain ourselves into the future.
And going off of that, since reopening, how has the ISM taken steps to secure its future here in Illinois and being open?
Well, I think what the future looks like to us is that the past may not be a very good model. I mean, in a sense, we draw on historical experiences to have a sense not only of the place we stand today, but where we go in the future. The model of the museum in the past has been perhaps too taken for granted. What that's encourages us to do is to have a much better sense, not only of economy, for example, about the other kinds of activities that draw people's attention, about new generations that articulate with the world and each other in very different ways. And so a museum which largely the bread and butter of which would be static exhibits that people would come and read without much other kind of experience may well be a part of a museum in the future, but I think that there are other components that we need to think about. Your generation is learning in ways that my generation didn't conceive. Your generation looks at the world in ways and with technology that many of us had not thought about. Because museums and other public history organizations are points to articulate society with the past, I think what we need to do is to become much more circumspect about audience and how we carry on not only the significance of the message, the importance of the message, but that we deliver it in a way that gains attention and therefore investment.
Completely agree. We are moving to a technological age, and you had mentioned we had discussed public history earlier. What does public history mean to you?
Another great question, because one might be inclined to go to the textbook and just read the answer out and say this is what public history is, but I think there's a far more personal sense about what public history means. For me, society has an obligation to provide historical recounting and historical assets and resources to the public, especially in a free and open and democratic society. The access to the past literally gives us a sense of where we are today and gives us guidance for how we move forward. In that context, then, there are two responsibilities. One, I think individuals have a deep responsibility to inform themselves about the past. So it can't just be an institution spoon-feeding people about here's what we think you should know. One of the things I think we need to do is to encourage the development of a passion in every citizen to have some sense about history, maybe sort of standard elements of the historical record, but also to encourage them to explore the past on their own, if it's their genealogy or their community or the distant past. We need to encourage that passion. At the same time, I think society, through government, has a responsibility to invest in the preservation of history. We all are, we're temporary in the world. The legacy of all of us is the collection of documents and objects that we gather together. They are the kinds of things that will foster passion in the future and provide opportunity for the acquisition of public history by citizens.
And following off of that, how do you view your role as a public historian?
I use the word temporary. When one gets farther into their career, shall we say, you realize that your time articulating what you do is going to come to an end at some point. And I think the very best way to think about this is that the objects and documents and stories are the real record. They're the legacy of public history. For me, I have been a temporary collector, a temporary collections manager, a temporary teacher, a temporary researcher. Each one of those elements have been hopefully contributions to the overall body of information that will be available to people in the future. So one day your own offspring may see an object that I collected 40 years ago. There may be a published article that relates the significance of that object, and there may be some of those objects in an exhibit, either online or in a physical exhibit, that articulate those kinds of events. So in the end, we have this obligation to preserve the past, to articulate it as a matter of public history, but most important, to ensure that it's there for generations in the future.
Excuse me 1 second. Sorry, I had to tickle my throat. All right.
You've been in this career path for quite some time. And how has public history changed during your lifetime?
It's, do you know, when you look over your shoulder at the past itself, of course, the stories of the past are exceptional. But I think what has changed the most in my career are two things. One is the means, methods, technologies, questions that we have to acquire history, to reveal the past, either in interpreting an object from an archaeological standpoint or rereading a document that gives us insight. So the acquisition, if you will, of history has changed a lot. The other thing that has changed is the way we disseminate that information. Here we're sitting doing a video commentary, which at the beginning of my career might have been done, but it would have been filmed in large cameras and lots of lights and so on. And so our ability to take that newly acquired information and use it as storytelling capacity to broadly disseminate it has changed profoundly. We could take an interview like this, document it, put it on Facebook, and someone in Indonesia could be looking at it this afternoon. Remarkable reach in our ability to transmit what we've learned.
So we've discussed public history and what it means to you and how it's changed over time. What are your thoughts and feelings on the state of public history in the state of Illinois today?
Illinois, like many places in the contemporary world, have a variety of challenges that we were not particularly familiar with in the past. We've had economic issues. There are a variety of others. Because it is my fervent belief that public history and the historical record needs to be a constant in that, I worry about the place of public history in the broader constellation of all of the other things that are going on. The state today, it seems to me, and by that I mean a feeling, a state of feeling, not the government, but the the state of public history today, I think, is in some sort of jeopardy. The museum, in fact, the museum experience, the experience of the Illinois State Museum should be a bellwether to organizations involved in public history, that we need to be continually vigilant and circumspect about who we are, what we do, what its importance is, and how we encourage people to invest in that undertaking for the future. There are myriad examples and quotations by famous and articulate people about the value of history. We need to remind ourselves of that, and I think we need to reinvest, if you will, in history and to develop that passion in people to understand that knowing something about the past has value and significance, and much more important, that it's applicable to the future in one way, shape, or form.
You've mentioned a few times about bringing the average person and just everyday people into doing their own history, whether it be genealogy or other areas similar. How is public history relevant to those average people? And how can they take part, and why should they care about saving their public history?
Do you know, it's difficult to imagine a conversation with anybody that a historical something doesn't come up in the nature of that conversation. So we're all about it. We talk about it a lot, but we may not be as systematic or methodical about it. And I'm not suggesting that we sit down every evening and read chapter and verse out of a history book to promote it. But what we need to do is to encourage people to understand that there's extraordinary value in being curious, and that there's exceptional value in gathering knowledge. I think one could argue that you can never have enough knowledge. And so in a society today where entertainment seems to occupy increasing proportions of our time, it doesn't mean that history and knowledge of the past shouldn't be included in that kind of entertainment venue, so that perhaps the historical narrative becomes palatable to the tastes of people today. So I think, again, we need to be circumspect about who we are and what we do, the value of it, and then find means by which we can engage curiosity and knowledge and passion about the subject.
All right. That actually is our last question. Did you have anything else that you would like to add into this discussion?
I'm glad people of the next generation are asking questions about public history, because it turns out that it is really what I've been involved in my entire career, and it's something that I want to hand on to the next generation. So the opportunity to articulate these points of view to you has been a pleasure.
And it has been a pleasure to talking with you as well, and thank you for spending your time with us today. That will conclude the interview.